Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. This is a place for vibrant discussions about mindfulness, movement practices, and ways to find more balance and presence in daily life. Here you'll find resources to help you progress on your path, as well as insightful conversations with mindful movement, yoga, meditation, and Dharma teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight embodied approaches to mindfulness and the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today to check out this episode of the podcast. I didn't do an episode last week because I was taking a training, which ended up inspiring today's topic. This training was a Tai Chi based balance program, which was really fascinating. I learned a lot about balance and fall prevention, which of course interests me as a movement teacher, but what really struck me was how it was really a form of resilience training. There was a lot of work in this training geared towards gently challenging your edges of balance and developing greater capacity. It very much reminded me of concepts like the window of tolerance, which is a model used in trauma recovery to work with nervous system states so we can better tolerate stressors. And it also reminded me of some fundamental mindfulness principles, like how we turn towards our experiences rather than practicing the habit of avoidance. So today I want to talk about some of these themes which show up in mindful movement practice and how we can use them to support resilience on several different levels. You'll hear about the difference between having a stress resilience approach versus a stress reduction approach, and a mindset of physical resilience versus having a fragility mindset about the body. Hopefully we'll make some interesting connections. And before we dig in, I would like to mention a new offering that I have coming up. It is an 8-week online program called Ease into Meditation, a movement-based mindfulness course. This course will cover many of the same principles you would learn in any introductory mindfulness meditation program, but with a key difference in the method. You would be learning the mindfulness skills first through movement, so you get familiar with what mindfulness feels like. You get to calm your nervous system and gain confidence that you can actually apply all of these mindfulness techniques in sitting meditation with a lot less struggle. A movement-based mindfulness course might be for you if you're curious about meditation and mindfulness, but you tend to feel too restless or anxious for sitting meditation. Or if you feel like you never have time to slow down and meditate, if tension, aches, and pains have held you back from meditating, or you're just a kinesthetic learner who likes to explore new ideas by doing. This program starts on May 30th, but you do the lessons on your own time whenever you want to during the week. I will put the link in the show notes, and you can also find it on my website at movedtomeditate.yoga under the Practice With Me tab. It's called the Ease into Meditation course, so that's what you would look for. Okay, to kick off this discussion about resilience, let me start by telling you a little more about the training that inspired this topic. I had the opportunity to take the TaiJi Quan Moving for Better Balance training last week, which is a program developed by Dr. Fuzhong Li, a scientist at the Oregon Research Institute. It is based on traditional Tai Chi, but with some significant adaptations that tailor this program to be really specific for balance training and fall prevention. I think many of the principles in this training could be applicable to all of us in a few different ways, as you'll hear, but they have particularly focused on developing this for older adults who are sort of just starting to have balance challenges. And they've also done a lot of work applying these techniques for people with Parkinson's and also stroke survivors. And in case you don't have any up-close experience with this, falls are a really big deal. It's a very, very common cause of injury for older adults, and a fall can be deadly or lead to really serious complications, life-threatening complications. And really, even the fear of falling can affect a person's independence and their ability to stay connected to others and do activities they enjoy, all the things that contribute to their health and longevity. And as our trainer kept saying in the program, the fear of falling just makes your world smaller. So this Tai Chi based program has been refined over 20 years. They've been working this program out and continuing to develop it for a long time. And it has a really solid research base. They've done quite a few different studies on this. And I'll link to it in the show notes so you can learn more about it if you want. It's a really excellent program. Tai Chi in general is considered a great practice for improving balance. And of course, it has a lot of other benefits too, but it is especially noted for balance because it's mostly done standing. And there's a lot of weight shifting and stepping, which is good for those functional movement skills. And it increases awareness and confidence in those kinds of movements. You know, by functional movement skills, like what that means is those movements resemble the kinds of movements you need to do in daily life. So it's really, really practical. And one of the big things, though, that they emphasize in this specific program, that's kind of where it starts to be an adaptation of traditional Tai Chi, is they talk about how you have to actually challenge your limits of stability if you want to improve your balance. So maybe you can hold a static balance, like if you can do tree pose and hold that really steady. But if you can do that, are you actually getting better at balance, or are you just maintaining what you have? Which is a kind of interesting question for those of us with a yoga background, right? Maybe we should be more excited about wobbling and having to like step in and start over and step out of our balance poses. And maybe we shouldn't be quite so worried about like getting to that place of standing totally still in them all the time. It's just kind of interesting to think about. And so in this Tai Chi program, they have you practice leaning in all different directions, enough so that it's a moderate challenge, so that your ankles, your hips, and your brain can kind of retrain and remember how to accommodate those challenges to stability. They have you practice typical balance exercises like the sit to stand, which is like practicing getting up out of a chair and having control and the ability to do that like slowly and without too much assistance. But they also have you practice reactive balance. Reactive balance is deliberately creating a disturbance in your footing so that you actually start to fall a little bit and then you have to take a step to catch yourself. You actually learn how to step reactively in each direction, like forwards, backwards, left, right, and on the diagonals. And you practice it enough times over this whole long program. This would be like, if you really did this program as a participant, it would be like twice a week for 6 months. So you practice all of this enough times that it becomes automatic, where you wouldn't have to think about it in the real world if you actually were falling. Neuroplasticity, right? It relies on our brain's capacity to keep learning and changing, our neuroplasticity. And so all of these techniques are incorporated into a set of Tai Chi forms. So it's fun and it's interesting. It keeps people engaged. And it has a lot of intentional cognitive elements to it, which are beneficial as well. So I found this kind of amazing because they're teaching these exercises to lots of elderly people who are pretty hesitant at first. And many of them have had falls already, or they're very afraid of that happening. And speaking as a movement teacher and as someone who has trained movement teachers and yoga teachers over the years, and watched us, and how we operate, often our gut instinct is to try to protect our students or encourage them to avoid things that feel edgy. And I think this is especially true when our students are older. Of course, we do want to create a safe environment. We don't want to push people towards anything that's overly risky or that's harmful. Nor do we want to just play into the cultural conditioning that more is always better, that harder or fancier pose is always better. But the other side of the coin is that sometimes we can treat people as more fragile than they actually are, and we may inadvertently discourage them from healthy exploration. This protective, fragility-based thinking that seeps in doesn't do that much to help us or our students develop resilience. Resilience means that we know we can handle challenges and we can bounce back to a healthy baseline state. It's like a kind of confidence. Whether we're talking about emotional resilience, nervous system resilience, or physical resilience. That's different than saying we know how to avoid or eliminate challenges. Knowing we can handle a challenge is different than saying I know how to perfectly avoid all the challenges. So I was really impressed to see that in this program, that they actively encourage these balanced challenge students to play with and simulate instability so that they can expand their capacity to restabilize. They do this, of course, in a very measured and progressive way that's appropriate for the student, so that's important. But still, it takes courage for everyone involved, the students and the teachers. And apparently it works. They have done large studies on this balance protocol with excellent success rates, like a 58% reduction in falls for the participants who committed to this program in that twice a week, 6-month long format. When you think about it, this approach is based on an acceptance that falls happen, that trip hazards cannot be totally avoided, and that you may get bumped in a crowd or you may get distracted while walking. That's very practical. When you accept those facts, the logical thing to do is train your response. When you wobble or get bumped, you can teach yourself to take a quick step in the right direction to restabilize. With practice, you can catch yourself with bigger and bigger wobbles and bumps. That's Dharma, right? In mindfulness practice, we often say, it's not so much what's happening to you, it's how you relate to it, or it's how you respond to it. Sometimes I think maybe the Buddha was the world's first stress resilience coach because the Buddhist teachings that inform our mindfulness practice, they really start with this basic recognition that life includes challenges. It's referred to as the first noble truth in Buddhism. Some difficulties are just unavoidable in this life, and when we understand this, we put less of our energy into trying to control the uncontrollable. We learn to relate to our challenges differently. So it becomes less about resisting the reality of the situation, getting stuck on wishing it was different, blaming ourselves or others for how it is, or trying to anticipate every possible outcome. Instead, we train ourselves to see clearly, to default to kindness, and then to choose a skillful response. When we say mindfulness reduces stress reduction, it's not because we've figured out how to eliminate all the stressors. The stress reduction is really a reduction in our mental and emotional reactivity and an increase in resilience. The window of tolerance is another model that might help you visualize this. It's a concept that's used a lot in trauma recovery, and it brings the nervous system into this resilience equation. I'll link to a diagram of this in the show notes if you're not familiar with it, because it's a visual and a picture might help this idea to land more clearly. But if you can imagine a window, like the kind of window you might have in a room in your house that you can look out of, and that you could maybe like open the curtains or push the window open. Imagine that window. Okay, the window represents your capacity. When you're in that center zone, you're within your window of tolerance, you can roll with things pretty well. You can kind of deal with what's coming at you pretty well. But above the window is another zone. When you've kind of moved out of that okay zone, you're in a new zone that starts to get a little uncomfortable. And it's going in a direction that includes agitation and irritation and sort of activation. And if that trend continues and it builds and it builds, you can become more and more dysregulated and move into a state of hyperarousal, like a fight or flight state. And then later, you calm down, you return to your baseline zone. The dysregulation could go the other direction too. So below the window, picture below the windowsill, below that okay zone where you're kind of dealing with things just fine, there's another zone where you start to feel kind of fuzzy or confused or zoned out, and your energy kind of like starts to drop. Not in a relaxed way. If this dysregulation continues in that direction, you move into hypoarousal or a freeze state. It's not like relaxation, it's more like a freeze. It's like a shutdown or a somewhat dissociated state. And some of us tend to more of the hyperarousal or the hypoarousal. Some of us can do either depending on the situation. And then again, of course, after a while, we do tend to return to our baseline. We kind of come back to like our normal level. The thing is, we can get better at recognizing these nervous system signals when we're starting to get a little agitated or we're starting to kind of zone out a little bit because something is going on that we're kind of about, right? And so when we recognize these signals, we can start to use tools and supports to nudge ourselves back towards our okay zone. With practice, we can do that more fluently, more quickly, and we can often prevent ourselves from going quite so far into a hyper or hypo-aroused state. These movements are actually normal. Our nervous systems are meant to be responsive to what's going on, but it helps to have some awareness of how to navigate it. Otherwise, these states can create a lot of confusion and discomfort for us. Like we might even spend so much time in them that we start to take these states as just like part of our personality. And you might have thoughts like, oh, I'm just an irritable person, or I'm just an anxious person, which could, of course, when we identify with that, that could like impact on our relationships and our choices and all kinds of things in our life. When you've had too much stress for too long without the chance to really recover, or you've been through traumas, aka experiences that were too overwhelming to fully process at the time when they were happening, these experiences make your window of tolerance smaller. So it's kind of like if someone came in your house and they like shrunk your window and you have less of it to like see out of, right? That zone in which you're okay with enough capacity to handle your stuff, it just shrinks, which means you're less resilient. And it's easier to get pushed off balance and pushed out of your window of tolerance, pushed out of your okay zone. So recovery from stress or trauma has to do with gently, gradually re-widening that window. You might need rest, nourishing, different kinds of support. And part of the process is moving towards your edges sometimes, learning how to regulate the nervous system in the midst of challenges, tolerable challenges, in order to get a little more confident and open that window a little bit further. So do you see the similarities between these concepts and these examples of resilience? I don't really think that they're separate at all. And what I notice is in a mindful movement practice, it actually gives us the opportunity to work with all these levels. If we're paying attention, we're not only working on our physical skills, but also developing our awareness and tuning our nervous systems. Balance is a great example. We can be practicing physical balance, leaning towards our edges and learning how to recover. And at the same time, we can be cultivating an awareness of how we relate to that. We can cultivate awareness of the sensations and the feelings of that, but also the stories that come up in our minds about balance or about how we suck at balance or lack of balance or I need to practice this, all of the different thoughts and all of the patterns. Practicing mindfulness of a movement or of a reasonable physical challenge can also be like a training ground for how we bring mindfulness to other situations. When we learn how to catch our reactivity with mindfulness and kindfulness, we can choose a more skillful, wiser response. Like with a balanced practice, it's not really about eliminating the possibility of a fall, because we probably can't control that. But that's not bad news, because with training, you learn that it's not inevitable that you'll hit the ground every time you stumble. You start to trust yourself more and more. Isn't that something to aspire to in our practice? I hope you've enjoyed exploring these connections today between movement, the nervous system, mindfulness practices, and what we can learn from this experience I had in this balance training. Thanks so much for listening and just for being curious about the insights that we might find through mindful movement. My website is movedtomeditate.yoga, which, if you want to send me a message, is a great place to find me. So if you have thoughts about this topic and how it resonated with you, I would love to hear from you. Or if you have an idea you want to give me for a future episode, shoot me a little email from my website. That would be really fun to connect. Okay, thanks again for being here. Thanks again for your practice, bringing your resilience and your balance into the world. I hope you'll be well until next time. So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend, subscribe on YouTube, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find it that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, courses, or teacher trainings, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. This is Addie D. Hilster. Thanks so much for listening.